Well, welcome to episode 67 of 10 Minute Record Reviews. And today I'm going to talk about this album, which is the very last album by the classic British rock band Faces. And this came out originally in 1973 on Warner Brothers. The album title, of course, is Ooh La La. This is a 2015 reissue with a number of interesting features. So, I don't know if you can see, but if you bend the cover a little bit like this, you can get the eyes to move and the mouth to move like that. A pretty skookum poster, which contains all of the song lyrics and photo of the band. It's a rather interesting construction because the entrance for the vinyl is actually on the top of the sleeve, but it's a gatefold with this rather magnificent piece of latticheness in the interior with the band and the Can-Can Dancer, who I guess is referenced in the very last track of the album. And classic green Warner Brothers label, of course, and of course the translucent red vinyl. So that's the Uber package that the 2015 reissue came in. What to expect from this album? Well, it's the Faces, right? It's got attitude, it's fun. It's kind of like the best parts of Rod Stewart meet the best parts of the Stones from that particular era, and in their best moments they're actually better than either Stewart was in his solo career or the Stones were, I would argue, at this particular time. And sadly, from this artistic peak, they then rapidly disintegrate. The usual story: egos, hurt feelings, and a variety of other distractions that led to a bunch of other outcomes, some of which were good, some of which were not so good, some of which were kind of sad. And interestingly, because it is from the period of time where the band was starting to fray, particularly because Rod Stewart's solo albums are taking off. He's had the massive hit with Every Picture Tells a Story in 1970 or 71, and another follow-up which did really well, and increasingly the band are being seen by the critics and by their fans, and some would argue even by Rod himself, as kind of the backing band to Rod Stewart. There's some tension here, particularly with Ronnie Lane, who had, of course, founded the original band Small Faces with Kenny Jones back in 1965. Here he is 8 years later, kind of being marginalized. But the great thing is, because Rod is so concerned with his own solo career, which is going so well at the moment, he actually doesn't play as huge a role as he had on previous albums because he's distracted. He only shows up to the studio sessions 2 weeks late. So this album actually has a ton of Ronnie Lane, who's a great songwriter in his own right, not necessarily the greatest singer in the world, but between Ronnie Lane and Ron Wood, there's a whole bunch of other diversity in the singing and the songwriting. Rod Stewart does play a role, but he's by no means a dominant figure in this album. It was produced by Glyn Johns, who knew a thing or two about holding together a band that were not getting along in order to produce an album, because of course he'd quite recently worked for the Beatles on the Let It Be sessions. As soon as this album comes out, Rod Stewart, I guess really sticking the knife into the collective, basically said to the press that he hated it. The rest of the band, understandably, were pissed off with this. Ronnie Lane decided that he'd had enough and he left the band shortly thereafter, goes on to some reasonably good things, but then very sadly is diagnosed with MS later in the 70s, and it's a fairly rapid decline for him after that. A tragic story for someone who's just a phenomenal musician and a really important figure in the development of British rock and roll. So side one starts off with the, well, we'll call it a novelty number, but a kind of a comedic number called Silicone Grown, which is a little bit juvenile. It's essentially, as you might have guessed from the title, a series of puns about breast augmentation, which apparently already in the early 1970s was a thing. It is, I think, a great example of what the Faces, I think, were really good at, which was being better than the Stones at being the Stones at this particular point in time. Anyway, if Silicone Grown is a bit of a groaner, the next song, Cindy, incidentally, is a wonderful, wonderful tune. One of my favorite Faces songs. When Rod Stewart was really good, he was a master at the humble rock song and the humble love song. So he sings stories about traveling and leaving and love's lost and love's won and so on, but he's always a character in these songs. But there's never any bravado. You never get a sense that there's any hostility, any negativity. The worst it gets is wistfulness. The wistfulness is really beautiful. And this is a great example of this. There's a great, memorable riff. It's kind of halfway between a ballad and a rocker. It's easy to play, but it is not easy to capture the spirit that the band brings to this, and the humanity that Stewart brings to his style of singing at this particular point in time. So superb, superb song. Following this, we're on to Flags and Banners, which is the first Ronnie Lane number on the album. There are several. This is probably the oddest of the bunch. It's hard to tell what the theme is, other than there appear to be some kind of Confederate Army themes, which is a bit kind of odd. In any event, this is not a bad song. I don't think it's the greatest song on the album, and the lyrics are a little bit impenetrable, but there you have it. And that's followed by My Fault. This song has some strength. It's got a lovely little descending hook for the chorus, which I really, really like. I think it lacks a little bit in the melody department. And lyrically too, I think it's a little bit of a throwaway, you know, sort of classic sort of young rock star ethos. I'm gonna be a bad boy, what are you gonna do about it? Yeah, you know, it's kind of high quality Faces filler, this song. And then the final track on side one is Borstal Boys. And this is anything but filler. It's got a classic Ron Wood opening piece. And lyrically, it's very interesting. It's essentially a lesson on jail and the inutility of sending people to jail. And the energy from the band is terrific all the way through. So a great song and a great way to end a pretty solid album side. So side two begins with an instrumental, Fly in the Ointment. I don't think I've ever heard it in rock and roll radio. It is a really, really good tune. There's a very simple riff which anchors it all, and Ronnie Lane's bass running underneath that, and really quite forward in the mix. One of the things about Ronnie Wood, which is hard to appreciate if all you can get in your head is Mike Myers' impression of him as a martini swilling, smoking jacketed rocker. This guy is tremendously talented, a multi-instrumentalist, and good as he was strumming and picking his guitar, he's also a phenomenal slide guitarist, and there's maybe no better evidence of that than on this song. So Rod Stewart has had to sit on the sidelines for that one, and he makes up for it on this very next tune, If I'm on the Late Side. This is a beautiful tune. It's a real vehicle for his voice and for the emotion that and the intimacy that he's so able to capture. And then following that highlight for Rod Stewart, then you have a Ronnie Lane song, Glad and Sorry. Now this is a better known song, and it's part of the reason these guys were so good is because they were, as much as they were a bunch of party dudes, they were also a collection of quite emotionally open artists. And both Stewart's singing and Lane's writing and composition and lyrics are often really quite deep dives into the souls of the performers, and this is a great example. In fact, Ronnie Lane's sort of more wistful pieces you get the feeling somehow that he almost knew that the story of his life was going to have some significant sadnesses in it to come. I mean, I don't want to read too much into it. All I will say is that knowing how his life pans out, it just adds a little something when you hear a Ronnie Lane song. He's singing here. He's joined by Ronnie Wood, which is a nice combination. It feels extremely genuine, and it's a masterful piece of production by Glyn Johns, which rises, I think, to the level of performances which are on offer. Followed by another wistful song by Ronnie Lane, Just Another Honky. It's another kind of sad, emotionally open song about a guy who recognizes that his woman is about to leave. The song really encapsulates those posters that you used to see on people's dorm room walls in the 80s. You know, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's kind of the theme of this song. But great song, and again, just beautiful writing by Ronnie Lane. So that's 9 out of 10 songs in the album. And after all of that emotion, all of that excellent songwriting, all of that collective spirit, all those pieces are just really a build-up for the final song, which is Ooh La La, which to me is one of those rock songs that approaches perfection. It's sad, it's funny, it's cynical, it's hopeful. The two Ronnies, Wood and Lane, wrote this song, and both Rod Stewart and Ronnie Lane tried to sing this song, and there are extant outtake versions with them singing, and neither of them was happy with their own performance, so the singing is actually handed over to Ronnie Wood, the only time which he sings lead on a Faces song in an unaccompanied way. Musically, you've got both Ronnie Wood and Ronnie Lane playing acoustic guitar, one in each channel. It's a very simple little song, it's very easy to play, it's very, very beautiful. And even though the song would be beautiful enough just with the acoustic guitar, Ian McLagan's sort of barroom piano solo is absolutely perfect for this song. This song makes me think a little bit about bossa nova, even though this is not a bossa nova song. The main idea, originally anyway, behind bossa nova was this Brazilian word saudade, which it's translated as wishing or longing, but it means a little bit more than that. It's a kind of a melancholy feeling. And this song, I think, is the closest that rock and roll ever gets to that feeling of longing and melancholy. This is a superb song, no matter what kind of music you like. I don't think you can fail to be moved by this. So for me, this album is worth at least 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is the Faces at their collective creative peak. And knowing what happens afterwards, you can look at this album and you can see where things are starting to fray and the cracks are starting to emerge. But those cracks and that fraying, if anything, only add to the quality of the music. Yes, it all collapses soon, but here they really hit the heights. Just an excellent album.